Welcome to the Candice Malcolm Show. I'm Kris Sims, sitting in for Candice Malcolm, sometimes this summer. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day and your week. I hope it's off to a great start. Lots to talk about on the show today. What's happening right now in Ottawa is that people are slowly waking up to the fact that government is coming back. So most of us who have kids, we're all getting ready for our kids to head back to school next week. It's going to be after Labor Day, so a lot of families are really busily trying to finish off their last bit of summer. In Ottawa, it kind of feels similar. So there's going to be staffers that are getting back into town. There's going to be bureaucrats trying to get their big binders ready for their ministers to take a look at. All that is to say, the business of government is going to start cranking up really fast in Ottawa soon once the House of Commons comes back. And that means they're going to figure out how to tax you more and how to spend your money. I wanted to raise this because you might have noticed last week, all of a sudden, it was elbows down across the nation. Wasn't that interesting? All of a sudden, Prime Minister Mark Carney is saying, you know what, we're going to drop retaliatory tariffs because this is the wise thing to do. Weird, because the Canadian Taxpayers Federation said that you should have done this at the outset. Because for people who don't know, tariffs are just trade taxes, okay? So if we have a tariff on American items, let's say a jar of pickles, okay? Say the Canadian government puts a tariff on American products like a jar of pickles. That is an import tax, okay? That means that you and I and those of us who are at the grocery store, when we go to pick up that object, when we go to pick up that thing that comes from the States that has an import tax, it is going to cost us more. It's on the same side of the border. If US President Donald Trump wants to slap import taxes on Canadian stuff, that's his thing, okay? But it is ultimately going to hurt normal working people on both sides of the Canada-US border. What's super frustrating here is that politicians like Carney and like many of his cabinet ministers have been able to skate on this issue now for this long by saying stupid catchphrases like elbows up or elbows down. That's funny for about 8 seconds, but it's not funny afterwards. Because again, at the end of the day, it's not just consumers on both sides of the border who are getting hurt because these are just trade taxes. It isn't just that industries are going to be damaged, okay? We're dealing with all sorts of stuff. Our farmers are facing tariffs, okay? Our steel producers are facing tariffs. All of a sudden, we do use a lot of steel around here, okay? So industries are being injured, okay? Consumers are being nailed. And at the end of the day, you're paying for all of this. You are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars per year for the prime minister's salary. You are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars per year for the international trade minister's salary. You want to start looking at the bureaucracy, now you're getting into really gnarly costs. Again, you are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for the deputy ministers and all sorts of specialists and experts who work in and out of government to manage this issue. Do you feel like the Canada-US issue with trades and tariffs is being professionally managed? Are you getting good value for your money? I can't help but point out that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith took a smart approach to this from the very start. She took a basic approach whenever you're in a dispute with somebody that you actually want to maintain a relationship with. Okay, say things are getting heated. What's the adult thing to do? Okay, the adult thing to do is take the tone down, take the heat out of the dispute, okay? Meet with them, find some common ground, something you both agree on. Then book your next meeting, something hopeful to look forward to. Premier Smith went right down there to the States right away. She did the soft soap diplomacy right away. And guess what? The tariff on Alberta energy was lower than it was across the rest of the country. That's because it's a really good idea to try to negotiate with your most important and biggest trade partner. Spitting in their eye, saying dumb things like elbows up, and trying to use them as a scarecrow during all of your press conferences doesn't help taxpayers. It doesn't help normal working people on both sides of the border. It'll get you some credit in the mainstream media, And it allow you to skate around other more important issues because the media will be distracted by it. But at the end of the day, it just costs normal working people money. I will also point out that back when Premier Smith went down to the United States, she got right in there and she got a hold of the ears of influencers, okay, who speak directly to the Trump administration and said, you know what? We can't afford this. Let's not do this. Let's make a deal. What can we do? Let's keep the lines of communication open. We don't think this is a wise idea. That's a smart thing to do. Now we're back at square one. All of a sudden, it's elbows down. All of a sudden, finally, the prime minister is saying, let's drop the retaliatory tariffs. At the end of the day, normal working Canadians want our governments, plural, to be smart, to earn their pay well, and to make a smart deal. Because people don't want to be punished with unnecessary trade taxes, which is exactly what tariffs are. It is well past time for the bureaucrats and the elected government in Ottawa to grow up, wise up, and start actually earning their pay. What's in store for us this fall? How much is the government costing us right now? Where on earth are we going to be able to find savings? Is the government really going to start banning the sale of normal gasoline and diesel powered vehicles? Why are they doing this? Let's find out. Joining me now is Franco Terrazzano. He is the federal director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, also my very good friend. He's stationed in Mordor, also known as Ottawa. Franco, we've been chatting about how the federal government can save money. And some of these headlines that we're seeing from the federal government unions, I'm sorry, but they're kind of laughable. It seems like they're running around like Chicken Little. What's the vibe on the street there in Ottawa?
Well, look, I think this is going to be the biggest fight as we head into the fall session of Parliament, right? I mean, look, truth be told, we actually don't know what Carney is going to do with spending, right? We don't know what he's going to do with the bureaucracy. We haven't seen a budget yet. However, the Carney government should be cutting the size and growth of the bureaucracy, right? Like the federal bureaucracy is so bloated, it costs you way too much money. I mean, look, the federal government added 99,000 extra bureaucrats since 2016. You're paying for 99,000 extra federal paper pushers, and the cost of the bureaucracy has gone up 77% in less than a decade. But get this, folks, like Canadians aren't getting better services, right? We just commissioned a poll from Leger that shows that half of Canadians say federal services have gotten worse since 2016. So you're paying an arm and a leg for this bloated bureaucracy. Your tax bill is going up. The government debt bill is going up. Yet federal services are getting worse, half of Canadians say. So look, I think there's going to be a big fight. I think these greedy government union bosses are going to light their hair on fire. But if the Carney government is willing to do the right thing, it has to roll up its sleeves and it has to fire some bureaucrats.
I was seeing some headlines there. I don't know if it was PSAC or one of the other government unions there that was saying, oh my goodness, if we cut too deep, it's going to affect our DEI program. I kind of found that funny. Here we go. Advocates warn federal budget cuts could reduce diversity and inclusion initiatives. I'm seeing that all over X this morning as well. And I kind of had to laugh to myself because last I checked, most taxpayers want the government to do really basic things. They don't need them wading into grant approvals for, I don't know, lesbian pirate musicals, for example.
Yeah, or I don't know, spending $100,000 tracking the birth, life, and death of a grocery cart. Yes, the federal government has actually spent your money that way. Or how about this? 20 grand for a report about the gender politics of Peruvian rock music. Okay, or how about this doozy, right? 8 grand studying the sexual and gender identities in online Harry Potter fan communities. I mean, what an absolute waste of money. We all know that J.K. Rowling's stance on gender is pretty firm. Plus, grown-up Harry Potter nerds never get laid. So I don't know why the government is spending 8 grand on a report like that. But look, it's not even just this silly, small examples of waste that we can go on and on about. Look, when the government can't do the little things right, you can bet the government isn't doing the big things right. And talking about the big things, look at the fat cats in Ottawa ballooning, okay? So there are now nearly 147,000 federal bureaucrats taking a 6-figure salary. right? That's about 40% of the entire federal workforce, and I'm putting that in scare quotes. Nearly 40% of the entire federal bureaucracy is taking a six-figure salary, right? So look, the federal government is broke, more than $1 trillion in debt, and I know that Canadians just can't afford to keep propping up a bloated federal bureaucracy.
I wanted to point out those ridiculous examples of waste because inevitably we'll hear something like, oh, well, okay, fine. What do you want to cut first? Food for orphans or help for war widows? Like, okay, how about we start with cutting the fact that they're giving out grants? Literally, he wasn't joking there, folks. Like the gender politics of Peruvian art music, rock music. Number one, you paid for that grant. Number two, you are helping in some way to pay for the bureaucracy which considers such grants and then hands them out. I'm not even touching on the fact that like Stats Canada and other bureaucrats have their own podcasts, which next to nobody listens to. And they talk about things literally like gay ghosts and whether or not outer space is sexist. Like, this is the dumbest waste of money. And I'm pointing it out because, Franco, I can hear them right now. I can hear people asking you, if you're in a mainstream media interview especially, of, oh, well, won't this cut too deep? Won't this affect services? Like, are you already getting questions like that, or are you just bracing yourself for them?
No, we're already starting to get it, right? We did a bunch of interviews when we released that Leger poll that showed that more than half of Canadians want the government to cut its size and cost of bureaucracy. That half of Canadians, despite the bureaucracy costs going up 77%, you still have half of Canadians say that federal services have gotten worse since 2016. So look, we're already starting to get that pushback already. But my quick pushback to that is, are you serious? The federal government added 99,000 extra bureaucrats, and still Canadians are saying federal services are worse. Okay, so clearly adding more government bureaucrats doesn't mean better outcomes for Canadians. That's step number one. I mean, look, we already talked about the extreme amount of waste, right? Especially a lot of wasteful spending going overseas, right? We talked about some of this, but $8,800 for a sex toy show in Germany called Who's is this 12 grand for seniors in other countries to talk about their sex lives in front of live audiences. I see Kris is laughing because she knows the government doesn't have to spend any money on that, right? You want to hear seniors talk about their sex lives, you just go to 2-for-1 Tuesdays at any Swish Chalet near you. Or how about the $1,700 spent on a musical about lesbian pirates? Right. So we're joking. We're kind of laughing because if we didn't laugh, we would cry over this government waste. But let's look at the big picture, and I'll stick with spending money overseas. OK, so in the most recent year, the federal government spent about $11 billion on foreign aid to other countries. OK, almost $11 billion or a little bit more. Now, in that same year, the government spent about $6 billion through the entire Department of Veterans Affairs. OK, so let that sink in. The federal government spent almost twice as much on foreign aid as it did through the entire Department of Veterans Affairs. Okay, so it's one thing to highlight some of the small wasteful spending as we are, but look, I mean, on the big things, the government is wasting huge sums of your money, taking money out of your pocket and wasting it, not just here in Canada, but of course, out of country as well. In fact, Global Affairs Canada might be the worst waste offender in the entire federal government, and that's saying a lot.
Yeah, if we had our own version of Doge, which people keep asking us to do up here in Canada, that's probably where we should start, is Global Affairs Canada. And I really wanted to highlight what he just said there, folks. Franco just said that we're spending almost twice as much on foreign aid, okay, sending money out of country, than we are on Canadian veterans. And I will point out that doesn't just include our own war veterans here in Canada, it's RCMP as well. It's managing their pensions. It's helping them with healthcare. It's helping them with PTSD. Like, these are Canadians, okay? It isn't like, but we're spending almost twice as much overseas. What a huge waste of money. There's another stat that you blew my mind with recently, Franco, and I still can't quite grok it. And that is along the lines of this. If we had kept the growth of the bureaucracy in line with our own population's growth, okay? So we're not slashing and burning, okay? We're still growing it, okay? Still adding more bodies to the, bureaucrats. But if we'd kept it in line with the population growth, we'd save like billions of dollars per year.
$7 billion. You would save more than $7 billion every single year had the bureaucracy had just grown in line with population since 2016, right? The bureaucracy, then just the number of bureaucrats went up about 38%, while Canada's population grew by about 16%. Okay, so if the bureaucracy had grown just in line with population, taxpayers would save more than $7 billion every single year. Now, it's not just the number of bureaucrats that taxpayers are paying for, it's also the cost that keeps going up, right? The perks, the salary, all that kind of stuff. I mean, let's look at some egregious examples, the bonuses, right? Taxpayer funded bonuses have cost Canadians more than $1.5 billion since 2015. Now, number one, why is the government handing out bonuses? Like, this is not the private sector. Why are you handing out bonuses? Number two, in what world is an organization that is $1 trillion in debt think it has any money lying around for bonuses? But then the government is handing out bonuses for clear failure. Okay, we all remember Arrive scam, right? It initially launched for 80 grand. Then the simple app blew up to a tab of about 60 million. Well, government executives working on Arrive scam took $340,000 in bonuses. Or the Bank of Canada. It has one job: keep inflation low and around 2%. Well, when inflation reached a 40-year high and Canadians couldn't afford groceries, the Bank of Canada printed up $20 million in bonus checks. Or how about the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation? Okay, another Crown corporation has said many times, it's to an effective like, oh, we have one objective overall: housing affordability for all. Okay, well, since 2020, they've handed out more than $100 million in bonuses, and we've been struggling with a housing affordability crisis. Makes no sense.
Yeah, makes zero sense. You are awarding government failure with taxpayers' money. What gets me is that even their own, see, for people who haven't worked in government, departments have their own little way of monitoring themselves poorly, and they set their own little objectives on what they want to do. They aren't even meeting their own internal objectives most of the time, like their little achievement grid or whatever they want to call it. Most of the time, or quite often, they're not even meeting those things, but they're still handing out bonuses. Even by their own measure, they're failing. I wanted to shift gears here because you are right there in Ottawa, and people often refer to as the kids coming back to school. So for most people who actually have their own kids and stuff in the house, kids are going back to school next week. Now, when do your kids, your MPs, actually come back to school? And I wanted to ask, what's first on the agenda in your mind? What are the main things that they need to tackle once the House starts sitting again?
Yeah, well, the circus will be back middle of September. And look, like I said before, I think the biggest fight is going to be around the bureaucracy, and I think it's going to be around spending, and whether the government will cut spending or what have you. Just because we're hearing that the federal budget, will finally be tabled sometime in October. But we've already kind of talked about the bureaucracy. I want to shift to another fight that I see coming, and that's around the government's ban on the sale of new gas and diesel vehicles by 2035, right? So by 2035, the government wants to ban the sale of all new gas and diesel vehicles. And the reason I think this is going to be a big fight is twofold. So number one is that this ban starts in 2026. So it starts in a couple months, where I believe about 20% of all new gas and diesel vehicles sold, or all new vehicles sold, will have to be electric. So the ban is starting next year. But the second reason I bring it up, why I think this is going to be such a big issue, is because Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives have vowed to launch a national campaign against the government's ban on the sale of new gas and diesel vehicles. So I think that's going to heat up real quick once September rolls around.
Yeah, that's a big, meaty one. I know here in Alberta, the Alberta government, led by Premier Danielle Smith, is doing the right thing. They've added this to their list of very serious grievances that they have with Ottawa, saying that we want this fixed, like right now. Like, they're not playing around. They're getting pretty mad about this, okay? There's a lot of people that are pushing for more autonomy, I will put it that way, here in Alberta versus Ottawa. And one of the main two big reasons here why people are fighting this so hard. Number one, the government has no place in the garages of the nation, okay? Like, why is the government getting up on people's grill, telling them, dictating to them what kind of vehicle they need to drive? I'll put it this way. So if you're, hauling cattle here in Alberta, or if you're a commuter out there in Ontario, you're trying to get into downtown Toronto or something like that, you're driving into London, like, that's up to you what kind of vehicle fits for your work and family requirements, okay? And the government is just bad at doing things, as you just described very fulsomely with the bureaucracy. They're big, they're wasteful, they don't know how to do stuff. Like, they couldn't organize a 2-car parade. So who are they to say this is going to fit for your family? It can't. And secondly, the main reason why the Taxpayers Federation is fighting this is that we can't afford this. Like, we don't have the money or the energy to make this thing actually work. The math just isn't mathing, as you say. The federal government itself already says that if they made a full switch, it would cost something like $300 billion.
Yeah, up to $300 billion, which just is absolutely banana pants crazy. I mean, look, yeah, number one, I think when you hear these politicians talking about banning the sale of gas and diesel vehicles by 2035, you got to ask yourself, how much is your tax and power bill going to go up? Because this is nuts, right? Like, as we just mentioned, a report that was published by the Government Department of Natural Resources. Look, this could cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Like, where are they going to get the money from to, build all this infrastructure, transmission, power lines, all this kind of stuff? Like, the tens of billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies going to multinational corporations to build battery plants, right? Like, how is the government going to pay for all this? Well, the only answer is the government's going to take more of your money. But like, look, this is such a half-baked idea. I was doing some research before we had this little chat, Kris. And what is it? Canada would require, 14 large CANDU nuclear reactors, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is nuts. The only silver lining is that this plan is so half-baked, the plan is so unrealistic that, like, hopefully just reality wins out in the day and the government just can't move forward with this ban on the sale of new gas and diesel vehicles.
I wanted to point out that with Alberta breathing down their neck, this might actually help. I know that last week the Alberta government did the right thing and they came out and said, we're going to use every tool in the toolbox here, folks, to fight this thing. They're even now going to take the federal government to court, which is outstanding. Folks might remember the so-called No More Pipelines law, Bill C-69. We've had some wins in the court front in some of those fights, so that's a really good thing to see. So I think it's really good for them to tackle this in every which way possible, because like you point out, we just can't afford this. This isn't something so simple as grabbing an extra power bar and plugging it into your outlet because you got a few more, video game systems or TVs. No, like, electric vehicles draw a lot of power. We unfortunately do not have an abundant, affordable energy system right now, even here in Alberta, where people might think that we're just swimming in it. No, we have warnings that we're going to have a brownout in winter if people use their hair dryers in the morning. I'm not joking. So, like, we do not have the cash for this. Do you think, Franco, I got to try to be a little bit of a strategist here. Carney has the room, okay? He's got the capital to come into the room and say, you know what? That was the last guy's plan. I'm the new guy. I'm the new prime minister. This was former prime minister Justin Trudeau's plan. Stéphane Guilbeault, you be quiet. No, shh, you're not talking at cabinet meeting today. Like, he has the room to do that, doesn't he?
Well, the reason I'm going to say yeah is, just look back what's happened over the last couple months. During Carney's early tenure as prime minister, he's already gotten rid of the consumer carbon tax. We all know that Carney is changing the carbon tax. He's going to hammer Canadian businesses with a hidden carbon tax. But look, he got rid of Trudeau's consumer carbon tax, if we can call it that. He also did the same thing with the capital gains tax increase. Right? Remember, the government wanted to go forward with an undemocratic and illegal capital gains tax increase. Well, Carney got rid of that too. So I do think there's some political room for Carney to maneuver here and say, hey, that was the last guy. I'm a new guy here. And I think Canadians will give him some grace on that if he's moving in the right direction. But let me just say, look, obviously there's a bit of a honeymoon phase whenever you have a new elected government, okay, that'll last a little bit of time. But if you look at some of the polling, like I saw some polling released, I believe over the weekend, right, that shows that Canadians' top concern, again, is the cost of living, right? Quite significantly polled more than what's going on in the United States. So again, cost of living is the top concern in the minds of Canadians. So I don't think Canadians have a single ounce of appetite for anything that will come from the Carney government or Ottawa that will make people's lives more expensive. So even if the government had a little bit of a honeymoon phase, I don't think that is going to last a long time, especially if the government is going to make people's lives more expensive, which it has for years.
I lastly wanted to touch on, Franco, this is great stuff. Speaking of making people's lives more expensive, this is what I think, if I were a betting lady, I would think that Carney has the capital to say, you know what, we're kicking this whole EV thing, as they call it, so far down the road that it's not going to affect us anymore. We're lifting the mandate. The car dealerships don't need to have a 20% sales. I am noticing There's even a little bit of sprinkling of the softening of language in there. They're using the term availability a lot now, where they weren't before. So I am sensing something in the force changing there. If I were a betting lady, though, I think the big fight is going to be the industrial carbon tax, because Carney wrote a book called Values, like he was the former UN special envoy to the United Nations on topics like this. He mentioned during the campaign, he mentioned during his leadership campaign, that he wants to strengthen and change the industrial carbon tax and talk about hitting your bottom line, talk about making the cost of living cost more. Where are we with this?
Yeah. So look, I think you've kind of outlined it pretty good, right? That Carney isn't ending all carbon taxes. He wanted to change the carbon tax. And I use his word, not mine. So look, the Carney government got rid of that consumer carbon tax, right? That directly applied on fuels like gasoline. You know, every time you went to the fuel to fuel up your car, that was more expensive. It was applied directly on your heating bill, like natural gas, for example. So the Carney government got rid of the consumer-facing carbon tax. But, you know, throughout the two election campaigns, I guess Carney ran, both for Liberal leadership and then the general election, many times he referred to essentially increasing that hidden carbon tax on Canadian businesses like oil and gas companies, refineries, and utilities. Now, look, Carney tried many times to be like, oh, don't worry, folks, you won't have to pay for that carbon tax. It'll be large businesses that pay. But, you know, fortunately, Canadians aren't buying Carney's spin, right? We released some Leger polling that shows that 70% of Canadians understand that businesses will pass most or some of the cost on to consumers through higher prices. In fact, only 9% of Canadians believe Carney that businesses will pay most of his carbon tax costs. And I mean, look, it's pretty obvious, right? When you carbon tax refineries, that makes your gasoline and diesel more expensive. When you carbon tax utilities, that makes your home heating more expensive. And when you carbon tax fertilizer plants, well, that drives up costs for farmers and makes your grocery haul more expensive. But, you know, if I can tie in the cost of living and what's going on between Canada and the US and our trading relationship right
Yeah.
now, remember, the White House, regardless of who is occupying the White House, whether Republican or Democrat, they're not bringing in carbon taxes, right? They're not. So look, a carbon tax on Canadian businesses will push Canadian entrepreneurs to cut down production here and to set up shop south of the border where there is no national carbon tax. Okay, so in effect, Carney's carbon tax is the worst of all worlds: higher prices for you and fewer jobs for Canadians.
That's a great point. And we need to stress it's in your book, actually, which I will point out is excellent. You actually
Shameless
mentioned
plug.
Sorry. But it is really good because there were some things in there that even I'd forgotten. So you point out in there that even like Barack Obama, okay, backed off on the idea of a national carbon tax. So the United States isn't on the brink of having one anytime soon. I think that's putting it mildly here. And back up here in Canada, if people, I personally think, coming from British Columbia, if they want a really tangible example of how this increases costs, okay, in British Columbia, they have what we often refer to as the second carbon tax. Now, it's technically a government fuel standard that forces companies to get into this credit system, meaning those companies have to pay more for the fuels that they are providing, okay? Both gasoline and diesel. Those companies are not eating the cost. They are not eating the cost of those increases. So on average in British Columbia, that's why when you cross the border, it goes up here from Alberta. On average, it's costing around 18 cents extra per liter of gasoline and diesel. Now, that isn't the same sort of industrial carbon tax, but I'm just showing you that they will pass on the cost because the companies can't eat it and it winds up making normal people pay more. Do you think, I was really heartened to hear that Leger poll. Do you think people are getting the message that the government can't just hide this?
Well, I think people always knew that carbon
Yeah.
taxes make life more expensive, right? The only people who tried to pretend like it didn't were the political pundits or academics or the government politicians and bureaucrats themselves who tried to twist themselves into a pretzel trying to explain that somehow carbon taxes made people richer. But of course they didn't, and Canadians never bought that spin. And that was one of the fatal flaws of the carbon tax that Trudeau tried to shove down everyone's throats, right? Is like Trudeau tried to tell us that carbon taxes could make us richer, and people didn't buy it because Canadians know, everyone knows that you can't give the government $20 and then somehow magically get $50 in return, right? It was always magic math from the beginning, and Canadians didn't understand it. So look, if the Carney government wants to continue pushing carbon taxes, it's probably going to try to do it in a very sneaky, hidden way, try not to talk about it. But that's why the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is here shouting, nay, nay, we are going to talk about it, and you're going to have to answer and tell Canadians, how much your hidden carbon tax on Canadian businesses is going to cost. Right.
Okay.
And like Simmer, I'm glad you brought up the fact that like a business isn't just a piggy bank for governments, right? They can't just continue to pay tax, and nothing happen, right? Either number one, they're going to pass some of the costs on to Canadian consumers through higher prices, or number two, they're just going to cut production, not reinvest in Canada, not hire more Canadians, more of our neighbors, and they're just going to go somewhere else around the world that doesn't have these high carbon taxes, like the United States.
Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, thank you so much for joining us on the Candice Malcolm Show.
Hey, Kris, thank you.
You bet. So, folks, you heard it there. So we've got members of parliament, okay, who are paid big bucks. They're going to be coming back to Ottawa very soon, and they've got an agenda. We're encouraging them to focus on three things: cut the size and cost of government in order to balance the budget and fight the debt; scrap this ban on gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles, which nobody wants and we can't afford; and third, get rid of your plans to create a big, bad, hidden industrial carbon tax. Because at the end of the day, what Franco said is right. Normal working people are still fighting to afford basics. And it's easy to gloss over something like that, but when you really think about it, it becomes more real, okay? So around 50% of Canadians are within $200 of not being able to pay the very bare minimum on their bills. That means covering the bare minimum on their credit cards, keeping the lights on, and keeping some food in the house, okay? Close to 50% of Canadians are in that situation. We've got a record amount of people demanding help at food banks now, okay? The highest level of growth that these volunteers are seeing at food banks come from working families. What that means, put normally, is that a parent who's holding down a job is still counting on donated jars of peanut butter to feed their kid. That's what increased demand from working families at food banks really means. So at the end of the day, it is the cost of living that is going to be front and center. And I would encourage everybody watching here to send an email to their member of parliament. Tell them that you want them to have smaller government, less waste, lower taxes, so that people can afford normal things in life. And for those of you who are thinking, oh, well, it doesn't matter what I say, these MPs won't care, that's not true. Because it was average people that made even Mark Carney blink on the carbon tax. If you look around at gas stations this summer, it's about 20 cents cheaper than it was last summer. That's because the consumer carbon tax is gone. And you folks made even Mark Carney say, I need to get rid of this and come up with a hidden one. So you speaking up and demanding something really matters. And what also really matters is sharing messages like this. You won't hear this sort of talk happening at will on most mainstream media channels. You won't hear discussions like this. You won't hear advocacy like this. So make sure you head over to Juno News, subscribe to Juno News, like and share this video in order to spread the word.